I promise you that I will have some controversial opinions at some point in this series. But this is not one of those videos. So if you're looking for controversial opinions, then get the fuck out here. Just kidding. Please don't go away. I want you to watch this.
Why don't you?
What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 6 of Young James Does Death Metal. Happy fucking Hanukkah. Merry fucking Birthmas year. Welcome to a holiday special episode of Young James Does Death Metal. Today we are celebrating the album Leprosy by Death. Merry Christmas. But before that, we're gonna go through a little recap here, so strap in. This might be a little bit longer episode. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to suffer through it. Okay, so we started the series with Cattle Decapitations, the Anthropocene Extinction. Then we moved on to Bolt Throwers, the Fourth Crusade. Then we moved on to Obituaries, the End Complete, followed by the two gems so far, Dismembers, Like a Never-Flowing Stream, and Suffocation, Effigy of the Forgotten. So now we've come to probably one of the most important and quintessential death metal albums there is. And even me, being someone that doesn't listen to a whole lot of death metal, or at least didn't used to, even I know how important this album is. Now, I've obviously heard Death, and I don't give a fuck what genre you listen to, whether it's metalcore, hardcore, pure thrash, whatever the fuck it may be. If you haven't done your due diligence to at least acknowledge that Death exists and hear some of their songs, you're a fucking poser. That's just the way it is. That being said, I'm not by any means a big Death fan, nor have I heard their whole discography, nor have I listened to a bunch of their songs on repeat. But I can honestly say that I am obviously aware of what Death is, and I have heard quite a few of their songs, and they're definitely not new to me. So I just want to put that out there before we start. Before we get started, though, I feel like I should have the opportunity to recommend a band to you guys, because all of these bands are recommended from you to me. So if you're on the Patreon account or Patreon Facebook page for Into the Combine, you've heard me talk about them already. There's a band called I Am, and they just dropped a new album called Hard to Kill about a month or two ago. It made my end of the year album list. It's a really cool change. They went from more of like a beat down deathcore kind of sound to almost straight death metal. It's still got a lot of core in it. It's definitely not actual death metal, but it's really fucking cool. It's a solid album. They sound great. And yeah, check them out. I Am Hard to Kill. That being said, let's get into Leprosy by Death. Now, this is probably the first album where I've actually taken the time to sit down and listen to it more than once. Obviously I've listened to every album more than once, but this one I actually sat down and just focused on this because I want to get this review right. Because if there's any elitists out there waiting to fucking jump down my throat, it's going to be this album that they're going to do it on, I think. So I actually wanted to do some homework and, actually listen to it and put all my focus into it so I can actually do a halfway intelligent sounding review on it. What beer am I drinking? I've gotten some comments on my choice of beer, so David, this is for you, buddy. We got a nice, nasty light going on. Shit's delicious. I don't care what you have to say about it. If I had to describe this in a few words, I would just call this a classic death metal album. So let's get to the discussion. Incredible riffing, incredible shredding. I mean, they fucking shred on this album. Now, it's not shred all the time, but there are some guitar solos in here that are fucking excellent. Of course, there's some really good riffing in there too. I mean, it's a fucking riff machine of an album. And you can't really deny that. The riffing is probably the strongest part of this album because it's so varied. There's a lot of variation in the riffing, but it's all still just quintessential death metal sound sounding riffs. It has great bass presence and bass tone. This is the first album that the bass is actually kind of at center stage a little bit more. In other albums, I know I've mentioned the bass, but this is an album where I feel like I could hear it almost all the time, and that was really cool. It almost sounds like a pure thrash album at times. Some of the riffs are super, thrashy and fast-paced and fast-picked, and it almost sounds like like an early Metallica or early Slayer maybe would be a better comparison. It almost sounds like that kind of album in a few different spots, which is very cool. I love thrash music, so I'm not going to complain about that. Again, the drumming is great. I don't think there's been an album on this list that I haven't mentioned the drumming, but it's no different here. Great drumming. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think it's mixed extremely well. It has a bunch of super catchy chants or hooks. I wouldn't call them choruses. That's what I always want to call it, coming from a metalcore background. The chorus is the part that hooks you in. And this has that. They're not choruses, obviously, but it's just got a bunch of catchy chants, like pull the plug, that kind of shit going on, which, is really cool. That it's a death metal album, but yet I could imagine myself being at a pit at a live show, and when the chant part comes on, the entire crowd fucking chanting along with it to a certain part. That's really cool. It sounds like a classic death album, because it is a classic death metal album, but it still holds up today, in my opinion, between the production, the riffing, and everything else. If this came out tomorrow, it would still hold up. It would still sound like not really a modern death metal album, and especially with the wave of old school death metal that we've seen lately, and I'm by no means an expert on that, but I know about it. With the old school sound kind of coming back, if this were to come out today, it would fit right the fuck in. My favorite song is Pull the Plug. It has a really good opening riff. It has that super catchy hook I was talking about earlier. It has the shreds. It has the thrash. It has the groove. I don't really know why it was my favorite song, but it was. Some other honorable mentions are Left to Die, which has a fucking sick thrashy kind of riff in it. Open Casket, Born Dead, and Choke on It. I mean, there's not a bad song on the album, but those are some songs that stuck out to me. It actually took me a couple of listens before I finally got it or understood it. At first, I thought I was going to have some controversial opinions to say about it because it didn't grab me right away in the way that Suffocation and Dismember did. It didn't immediately suck me in and make me want to listen to it over and over again. It kind of took a little bit to build up for me to realize what I was listening to. I don't know why, and it's probably because I'm a stupid imbecile. That's probably why. But after about maybe when the third time I was listening to it, then it finally just started to click, and it grabbed me, and I understood what all the fucking hype was about, and I understood why this would have been a huge deal back in late 80s, early 90s, I forget when it came out, why it was such a big deal when it came out, because it's just fucking good. Just solid. That's a good way to put it. It's a fucking solid album. And back then it was kind of groundbreaking, I'm sure. I'm stuck somewhere between being glad that I waited so long in the list to finally listen to this, but also kind of wishing that I'd listened to it first so I could have kind of gotten that taste of when it first came out back then. I'm kind of sad that I'm missing out on not hearing it when it first came out because it had to have been so new. And it just doesn't have that, it didn't have that, what the fuck is this factor that it had back then for me because I've been listening to other death metal albums. So when I first turned it on, it just sounded like another death metal album until I realized, no, this is really fucking good. And especially for the time that it came out, it had to have been groundbreaking. It had to have been fucking cool. It had to have been fucking sweet. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but I guess the biggest point is that I didn't quite catch on to it right away. I had to listen a couple times before I finally got into it and finally grasped it. The three things that I talk about, the first one being production. I've already kind of hinted at this. I think the production is fucking fantastic. The guitar tone is amazing. It's bright and it cuts through and it's not buried by anything. It's mixed perfectly. And I say it's bright, but it's still nasty and dirty sounding. It's still, heavily distorted guitar tone, but it's almost bright sounding and has enough oomph in it to where it fucking cuts through great, and you can really hear it in the mix. But between the bass, the drums, the vocals, the guitars, it's mixed beautifully, I think. You can hear everything clearly, but nothing dominates. I don't know what else to say other than, again, if this album came out tomorrow, it would still hold up to today's standards, in my opinion. The second thing that I talk about is song structure, and kind of the same as the other albums I've reviewed on this list, is it just kind of moves back and forth between your grooves and your fast riffs and your thrash. One thing I will say about it is this one had more of like a consistent pulse the whole way through, but this one kind of had the same tempo throughout. It didn't seem like the songs varied a whole lot in the tempo they would move at, which was kind of cool because it just kind of had this pounding pace where it just kept chugging forward and forward, and that was really cool. Obviously, lots of variation, I already said that, but the thrashy parts are what really stood out to me, how it kind of sounded like a thrash album at times. And then lastly are the vocals. Now, this is the weird part for me, is they're less death metal sounding than I would expect to come from a band called Death, but they still work. They're more like shrieks and shouts and chants instead of the deep, nasty gutturals that I expect with death metal. But I suppose back when this first came out, I don't know if anybody was even doing the gutturals at the time, and I'm sure these vocals were still pretty fucking off-putting. And so, I mean, I'm definitely not saying the vocals are bad or that they don't fit the music. I'm just saying that it's not quite what I would expect from a band called Death with such a quintessential death metal album. That being said, still loved them. The vocals are good, just not what I expected. Finally, this is where I might get a little bit controversial, and that is the rating. Now, when I give these albums a rating, it's not that I'm giving them how good of a death metal album I think it is. If it were how good I think this album is in the death metal spectrum, this album would easily get a fucking 100 out of 10. But I'm giving the rating more off of how much I actually enjoyed the album and how much I actually see myself going back to it and how much I think it's actually influencing me in listening to death metal. And with that being said, I'm going to give this an 8. I don't know if that's terrible of me. I don't know if you guys are going to fucking hate me for saying that, but I'm just going to give it an 8. Like I said, it took me a couple listens to get into it, to get invested into it. And so with that, I'm not going to give this a 9.5 like I gave Dismember and Suffocation, where right from the get-go, I was fucking hooked. It's a great death metal album. I understand that. I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that for my own personal taste, this is not a knock it out of the ballpark album. That's the most explaining I'm going to do. I feel like I'm digging my hole deeper and deeper with every word, so I'll just leave it at that. The one thing that I did like about it, though, was, again, those catchy hooks, those catchy chants. That is one thing that is unique to this album so far on the list that I actually really enjoyed. But overall, obviously, a great fucking death metal album. You're fucked in the head if you can't realize that. So yeah, there's Leprosy by Death. I don't know what else to say. It's a great fucking album. It should be on this list. It should be on every single death metal for beginners list. This is an absolute must-listen-to album for any true death metal head. So I guess that's where I'll leave it, guys. Merry fucking Christmas. Happy holidays. Whatever shit you're into. Go pray to Satan for a day or whatever you're going to do for the holidays. I don't care. Just enjoy it. I know I'm going to enjoy it. I don't know when this next episode is coming out, but I'm hoping after the holidays are over, I can get back to doing weekly episodes. Plus, there's some other albums and shit that I want to do videos on so the three of you watching can hear my useless opinion on them. So hopefully I can get an episode out after Christmas. If I can't, I promise you I'm going to start doing these more regularly, and hopefully it works out. So thanks for listening, guys. You stay young and you stay metal.